As most of my long-time subscribers will be aware, I get particularly exercised about the contemporary tendency of publishers to tinker with the un-PC language of classic literature. So, hat tip to Macmillan for their bravery in reprinting a collection of poetry by Hilaire Belloc in the original language as used by Hilaire Belloc. Admittedly, they are putting a trigger warning right at the beginning, but from then on, they're not letting any semi-literate sub-editor loose on the text, so that it will remain in its original form. And every word will be authentic Belloc's. I'm Grannyopteryx. Oh, come on. How could I pass up something like that? I mean, it was just impossible to pass up. And I'm not entirely sure it was any great principle on the part of Macmillan either, because Belloc is so full of stuff. I'll bet you when the 10th semi-literate sub-editor had a complete nervous breakdown trying to eliminate everything objectionable and then discovered there was nothing left. They probably just gave up and said, oh, sod it, we'll just do the whole thing as is. Again, with a trigger warning at the beginning. Hilaire Belloc's children's poem, given trigger warning over hurtful rhymes. That reminds me of a time I got caught telling some... I'll tell you about that in a minute. Let's just get on with this. Authors reissued classic works latest to be slapped with cautionary notes after Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl and Agatha Christie. I don't know about Agatha Christie, but I have seen where Ian Fleming was modified, and they completely missed the entire point. In fact, they'd made a horrendous mess, because there was one... and the example I saw was a time when a story, I don't remember anything about it, except that James Bond was in a nightclub in New York, and Ian Fleming was very scathing about the way blacks, well, I think he called them Negroes, were being treated in that context. Very scathing, but they'd completely removed the whole thing, which sort of defeats the purpose, really. Anyway, it says here, classic children's poems have been given a trigger warning by a publisher because they may be harmful to modern readers. Oh, dear. Prolific author Hilaire Belloc's popular comic verse included the 1907's Cautionary Tales for Children, including the 1907's Cautionary Tales for Children, has been republished by Macmillan with a new cautionary note. Trigger warning printed in the collection of humorous children's poems warns that the rhymes may be hurtful or indeed harmful to modern day readers. Oh, for goodness sake, the children don't... Actually, yeah, speechless. How could they say those poems are harmful? They are rather funny, and they don't harm kids. All the kids who grew up with Belloc's poems, they were the ones who went to war in the 40s and struggled their way through the the very chilly and dusty 60s as Britain tried to put itself back on its feet, and worked hard to create a country that's really pretty good and is now being ruined by their grandchildren, really. But the Belloc generation, they acted well, bravely, honourably and decently. The disclaimer alerts readers to potentially troubling phrases and terminology in the collection and the harmful language prevalent at the time. Well, I'll just tell you my story. I was invited to dinner with one of my sons, his wife, and their two children. And we all had dinner together. My husband was away, so I think they reckoned it was a good time to bring me over and feed me on account of me being so infirm I can't make supper for myself. And we had a very nice evening meal, and then the kids were being sent to bed. And son's wife, she said, would you like to read them a good night story? And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so I went into the bedroom. The two kids were on a bunk, and then they handed me the book that they were to read from. And I started reading this book, and it was incredibly worthy. Incredibly worthy. And I started to get bored. I thought, no wonder this is putting the kids to sleep. And I said to the kids, would you like me to tell you a poem instead? And they said, yeah, all right. And I said, there's a poem about James who ran away from his nurse at the zoo and got eaten by a lion. Would you like that? And they went, yeah. And then I started, there was a boy whose name was Jim. His friends were very good to him. And I know all those poems off by heart because, well, I told them to my children. Anyway, there I was. And at the point where, when the lion is he's got hold of James, and yeah, it was somewhere around that bit where it goes, now, just imagine how it feels when first your toes and then your heels, and then by gradual degrees, your ankles, shins and calves and knees are slowly eaten bit by bit. No wonder Jim resented it. And I just got that, and I saw out of the corner of my eye a sort of flicker. So I looked sideways, and there was my son and wife standing at the bedroom door with an expression on their face like this. Both of them, same expression. Frozen. Anyway, I thought, good. And the kids were having a wonderful time. And then I finished the poem and I said, right, you feel like sleeping now? Yeah, that's all right. And they went to sleep. And then I got up and I came out, got out the door, and son's wife shut the door. And then she turned round and sort of stood with her back against the door, like she was protecting something. And she said, Mum, never do that again. I said, I'm terribly sorry. I thought they'd enjoy it. Which they did. But that's the trouble with woke people. And I was somewhat disappointed with my son. I mean, he'd been brought up on those sorts of poems, and a more gentle gentleman you couldn't wish to meet. So anyway, what's the rest, the end of this? Chris Hare, the vice chairman of the Hilaire Belloc Society and author of the work Hilaire Belloc, Politics of Living, has criticised the use of warnings. He told the Telegraph, it's what we see today, a huge sense of caution and generalised anxiety about saying the wrong thing. We live in an age where people are permanently anxious about causing offence. Well, you know what? In this situation, not so much, but you can be arrested now for causing offence. People are getting into the habit of being worried about causing offence because the government have made causing offence a crime. And it's not good for human interaction. And it's not even good for children, because children go through these awful, cruel things in their minds. They have to come to terms with this sort of thing. Cotton wool is not the right way to bring kids up. Since the Second World War, continues Chris Hare, we have lived in quite a coddled society. Since about the 70s, I suppose. It's no longer the school of hard knocks, but the school of comfy living. Belloc himself saw this coming, a time when old ideas of morality have faded and nobody has any idea of what might be right or wrong, so they worry about what might cause offence. I think he wouldn't be surprised by this, although he would likely be saddened if it was because of his children's poetry. Well, the interesting thing is, we may be worried about causing offence with these sorts of poems, but apparently demonstrators are not worried about causing offence, for instance, with anti-Semitic tropes on placards about Israel and Gaza. You can help my channel by clicking like, by subscribing, by clicking the notification bell, and by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels are in the description, also links to donation sites, but really the best way you can help me is simply by clicking like. Thank you. Or even tracking down politicians and harassing them. They're not that worried about that, but they are worried about lions, fantastic stories about lions, which reminds me of the final words of that poem, that James poem rather, and it goes, they'd all his children round attend to James's miserable end, and always keep a hold of nurse, for fear of finding something worse. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.